I'm going to share my screen. Do you want to start, Erica?
Yes, thank you, Minji. So you couldn't really see in the video what we were doing, but here you can see the mbira that we were playing. And here you can see how it's held with one finger in a hole on the lower right side, and the left thumb is plucking down on the double row of keys. And on the right side, the right thumb plucks down on the 3 keys closest to the middle of the instrument, and the finger plucks up on those smaller keys toward the outside of the instrument. And here you can see how the mbira is fixed inside the deze, the resonator, which is, it's like a low-tech amplifier. It just makes the mbira louder. So it's wedged in either with 1 stick or 2 sticks. And here you can see how the instruments, really have a variety of looks. So this music has been played in Zimbabwe for more than 1,000 years. And so generation after generation have taught it to their children so that the tradition goes on. So here you see a young girl learning from her father, Fungai Mujuru, who we'll see, I think, in one of the later photos. And you can see we're inside a village room. You can see how the cooking is done over a fire in the middle. So this is not a bedroom hut. This is a cooking hut. And she's sitting near that nice warm fire, practicing. And here you can see a young group. These guys were so much fun. They're called the Jevahera Mudoni Mbira Group. Two young brothers, they're young adults. And then their friend playing the hosho rattles, the rattles that hold the beat with Mbira music.
What's in the hand of the man in the middle?
That's what I was just mentioning. They're rattles, and they play a beat that just keeps going on. And that's the beat that people dance to with Mbira music. Because in a ceremony, an Mbira group will play all night long, and people will be dancing and singing and clapping and participating. So this is not concert music. Although if Mbira groups come to the Western world, of course they give concerts, but in the traditional culture, everyone participates in Mbira music. So when a Mbira group is playing, those hosho, the rattles, they have the dance beat that people are dancing to. And anyone can be singing along, anyone can be clapping different rhythms. Sometimes people will just clap a basic beat. Other times people will clap something so complicated, it's like what we would think of as a drum solo, really complicated rhythms.
Wow.
And one thing to know about how Mbira music is organized is that the musicians playing Mbira are each playing a different part, and those parts are interlocking. So each part itself is pretty complicated, but then how they interlock just makes the music even much more complicated.
Wow.
And then there's a basic piece, but there's also improvisation that happens. But the improvisation has to be within the tradition. So there's so many different ways to play even one song.
That's so interesting. It's very different from our conventional understanding of music in a way.
Mm-hmm. But there's some ways in which the improvisation is very logical. I've actually thought that people in the Baroque era of Western classical music would really understand Mbira music because of the way some of the improvisation is done is similar to what you hear in some music from people like Bach. So it's really amazing. I've had experiences of teaching personally people in the Western world, everything from people who've never played an instrument before to people who are music professors or even chairman of a music department of a big university. And as those people who are very educated in Western music learn more and more in Mbira, they just get more and more amazed how complex it is. Because I think there's such stereotypes about African music that it's all about rhythm and drumming. And people know that there are complex rhythms in African music, but there's also so much complex melodic improvisation in Mbira. So even just the way the parts interlock is complex, and then the improvisation that happens just takes it farther and farther. It's really quite amazing music.
You did mention that it's a music which started 1,000 years ago. Is it because it's evolution that makes it more complicated? I'm quite amazed by how complex it is.
I don't think that's really known, but I kind of doubt that. I think that's always been the tradition. And it's at least 1,000 years old, but it may be several thousand years old. That's not really known.
Wow.
What I would say is interlocking melodies is something that is there in African music. You find it in some cultures with xylophone music, in some cultures with vocal music, in some cultures with even panpipes. There's so many different ways that music can be interlocking. And something that I think of about it is how in traditional cultures, not only in Africa, but in general, older cultures, the community has such interlocking in the way they participate in life and help each other. And to me, in a way that's represented in the music, in the way things are intertwined, there are intertwined melodies, interlocking parts.
So interesting. So interesting. Wow. You're blowing my mind. Shall I move on to the next slide?
Yes, thank you. So most Mbira groups have 2 or 3 Mbira players and 1 or more playing the hosho rattles. But here you see a family, and in fact, close to the center is the musician I played with on the video we started with, Frederick Mujuru. And sitting next to him with the white hair to the right is the father who was teaching that young girl that we saw earlier. This is the Mujuru family, and they have so many Mbira players in their extended family that if you go to one of their family ceremonies, there can definitely be more than 2 or 3 people playing. As here you can see there are 5 people playing Mbira. And those people sitting in the back are probably singing along.
So it is a full-time profession, is it? Or it's not something, a hobby?
It's not really a full-time profession because you don't have ceremonies all the time. So it's something that traditionally has been really respected. For people who are still very traditional, it's still very respected. But of course, you know, with Westernization and globalization of culture around the world, there are many people who are, you know, urban, Westernized people who are not necessarily still respectful of the tradition. But to play Mbira, the most important role of the music in the traditional culture is that it's what actually Frederick Mujuru first introduced me to. The way to explain it, he said, it's our telephone to the ancestors. It's our way to communicate with the ancestors and bring them close to us so that they can help us. Because in traditional Shona culture, the ancestors help with everyday life. And that can be everything from nearer ancestors that might help with a family problem to ancestors centuries ago that have greater power. You know, they're ancestors of thousands or even millions of people, and they are believed to help with things like drought or flooding, all things which are getting worse with climate change. So I don't know. But playing Mbira, so the concept is that Mbira music belongs to the ancestors. And so living people are graced to play it so that they can play the music of the ancestors for the ancestors. And it doesn't mean it's not played in other contexts, because people might also just play it for their own enjoyment or for their party or for their own personal meditation by themselves or in a context of healing with a traditional healer.
Wow.
There are many ways in which Mbira music is used, or in more recent decades, Mbira music could even be played at a governmental meeting of leaders of different countries. Because it's so considered the national music of Zimbabwe, Mbira.
Yes.
But in the tradition, the most important is playing it in a ceremony for the ancestors. And those ceremonies go all night long. And as I was mentioning before, people participate in the music. They're dancing, they're singing, they're clapping. And then if an ancestor comes to speak through someone, then everything quiets down and people who aren't involved in that go out for a while. Maybe they're eating or having a drink or whatever, while the important business is discussed. And then the music starts up again and it goes the rest of the night.
It must be a really magical experience. Have you?
It's really amazing. Yes.
It sounds
it's very
magical.
It's really lovely how people are all involved. And so the difference, when you come from a culture where music is more of a performance thing, commonly, and then you go to a culture where music is a participation thing, it's just so special. And it's not that we don't have anything in our own cultures, where people participate, but so many people are participating together. It's really special.
It sounds like a language to communicate with the ancestors, and it's also a community language.
Yes. And interestingly, although the ceremonies don't happen all the time to communicate with the ancestors, but when an individual traditional Mbira player plays Mbira even by themselves, they can be praying to their ancestors because the music will be drawing their ancestors close. And another friend of mine, Irene Chigamba, I loved how she explained when we were touring together to a student why a lot of the singing is not necessarily with words. It can be with vocables like, wah, yay, things like that. And she said, sometimes our prayers are so painful about things that are very difficult that we can't even sing the words. We have to sing like that, to just put our feelings totally into it.
Wow. Very special, very magical.
So let's go on. Yes. So here's a context. Not so long ago, this was in 2019, where I was recording a village Mbira group. Because we haven't talked yet about how I started a nonprofit organization. I guess that's called NGO in most of the world, to try and support this music and its musicians in Zimbabwe. So I started that in 1998. People can learn all about it at the website, Mbira, just like the instrument, mbira.org. And there's so much information there. You can read biographies of Mbira players. You can see photos of Mbira makers making the instrument. You can buy recordings that support musicians, more than, I don't know, there's hundreds of recordings up now. You can buy instruments made in Zimbabwe and support traditional instrument makers. You can download lessons to learn on those instruments, video lessons. So there's a lot on there. Oh, you can also make donations to support the work of the organization, which is so far directed about 1.3 million US dollars to Zimbabwean musicians and instrument makers.
Wow.
So here you just see one group. This is the Ruizi Mutoro Mbira Group. I was recording them in a village in 2019 in the Mondoro area of Zimbabwe. So you can see I have small equipment because, you can't just lug around a whole recording studio with you. So I have my recording equipment that's just small that I can use to make still quite good recordings of musicians in Zimbabwe. And this is just a beautiful photo for you to see what Zimbabwe looks like. Of course, it's not all like this. There are also savanna grasslands, but they're beautiful granite outcroppings and granite mountains and hills in many places.
So, Eric, thank you for sharing really beautiful music and tradition, beautiful people playing them, and really beautiful cultural heritage and language that people speak among themselves and speak with their ancestor for the last presentation. I was so mesmerized. I couldn't speak much. But now let's get down to our Q&A session. I'd love to know more about you and this organization you set up and the vision you have, your plan for the future. Let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are, where do you live, and how did you get connected with this Mbira music instrument?
Well, I live in Berkeley, California in the US, and I fell in love with this music when I was 16 years old, when I was just starting to attend university. And there was a Zimbabwean musician there who didn't play this music actually, but he played some other Zimbabwean music that was being used to teach school children in Zimbabwe. So there was a small type of mbira, not this one, marimba, a type of xylophones that are played in a group, and also singing and dancing. So I was learning some from him, and he had some of the vinyl records of mbira music, which was sold on vinyl singles back then. We're talking the big 1970, 1971, back then. And I just fell in love with that music. So I enjoyed what I was learning from him, but I really, really wanted to learn that music that I heard on the recordings. And I didn't really realize how weird and unusual that was for me to fall in love with that music until my own children reached that age, and they weren't obsessed with anything strange like I had been. I just fell in love with the music. I so much wanted to play that music. So I actually quit university and worked twice before I managed to save up enough money to go and study it in Zimbabwe, which at that time was still Rhodesia. And it was pretty much like what people know about apartheid South Africa. There was separation of the races. So it was very challenging for me to be able to learn there. And I was denied permission to even go to live in a mission, which I had thought would be the safe way as a white person that I could be able to be allowed by the government to live next to villages where people played mbira. So I was restricted to the city, but I was able to connect with traditional mbira players who lived in the city to work. And so I was able to learn from some amazing musicians. I was very lucky.
So I remember you said you went there, the first time was 1974.
Yes, I was 20 years old.
All by yourself. Was it a huge curiosity and a passion?
Well, it's the age when you think you're immortal, that you're indestructible. You can't imagine that anything bad could happen to you. And I really was pretty daring in how I went about things. And, in Zimbabwe, they say that when you're drawn so strongly to mbira, it means that spirits want you to play. And then then perhaps they were also protecting me because that's what I was there for. But it was also very challenging because, of course, at the time, the liberation war in Zimbabwe, the tiny minority of white people that were trying to hang on to power were being supported by racists in the US South. And so being an American did not mean I was automatically going to be trusted by people in Zimbabwe. And so when people heard that there was some American girl who was playing mbira, they were like, oh no, she might be CIA or something. But then when I would play mbira with my teachers and be singing in Shona, they were like, oh yeah, no, okay, she's not CIA.
Yes, ancestral pass the message, she's not CIA.
And they would ask for me to play by myself to make sure that that was really me playing all that.
Well, did you speak the language? I have tons of questions, like, did you have difficulties? What was?
Well, I did learn some Shona before I went. But I would say that most people's English was way better than my Shona because they learn English in school. So, since I was in the city, people mostly did know English. So the good thing about knowing some Shona was that I could be polite and I could do all the proper greetings and the proper manners, my thank yous and my excuse me's. And I knew enough Shona to haggle over the price of my mangoes in the market and things like that. I mean, I did know some Shona, but I just have to confess that in many cases, people knew more English than I knew Shona, but between those two, we were able to communicate well. And then the other thing I would say is that the traditional way to learn Mbira music is your teacher just does it and you just try to do it also. There's really no talking. So language isn't really required in order to learn to play in the traditional way. And basically you're taught the first of the interlocking parts. And then once you can play that, your teacher switches from playing that with you to play the other part that interlocks with yours. And you just are hanging on for dear life, trying to keep playing your part you just learned while your teacher is rocking out, playing all these other things with it in his part, his or her part.
It's a very different way compared to how, for example, I imagine we learn Western music. It's very much an apprenticeship model. Did you learn all the theories? There's no learning of theories. Just see what the more experienced player was doing and try to copy that.
Yes, it's very experiential.
Yes,
and the improvisation isn't really taught traditionally. You just learn that basic part, but then from what you hear your teacher doing, or maybe you hear another player, when you're listening sometime doing, you start to figure out how to do those other things and start to understand how they work. So when I teach, because I teach people that don't have access to be immersed in the culture like that, I really take apart how the improvisation works and I teach people in a more detailed way. And I teach them both parts. Whereas when you're first learning in Zimbabwe, you just learn the kushaura part, the part that starts playing first. And you're not traditionally necessarily taught the kutsinira part, the intertwining part. It's more that if you become an advanced player, you're going to figure out how to play that. You're just going to be able to do it because you heard someone do it, because you'll be so good by the time you're ready to do that. But because I teach people who don't have that opportunity, I teach in a more detailed way all the different aspects of it and the different parts. And when more than two people play, there's actually more than two different parts happening. So if there are 3 people in the Mbira group, they'll each play a different part.
It also
all
looked
intertwining and interlocking.
It also looked like you made good friends with this.
I have so many good friends in Zimbabwe who play Mbira. Yes.
How were their life like, and how are their life like as a Mbira player? For these musicians, what's their life like?
It really varies, because I know so many musicians there, and even amongst the ones that I've brought through the organization to tour with in the US and perform at universities, even those, they have really different lives. For example, there's one woman who is a high school teacher in a town. So she has one kind of life. There's another musician who lives in a village and is a traditional healer. So he has a completely different kind of life.
That's good. There's a lot of diversity in terms of.
There's a lot of diversity. Or the man who played in the video with me, he is a traditional instrument maker. He's actually considered to be the best Mbira maker in the world by many people. He made the first Mbira that we saw in the slides. And he has homes both in the city and in the village. So a lot of his work he'll do in the city. And, if he needs to ship a box of instruments, he needs to be able to go to the post office easily and all that. But then he also has his village home, which is so beautiful and peaceful, and where they grow their own crops for a lot of their food. of course, when they're in the city, they'll be buying some other food also. So, he has a life back and forth. So there's a lot of diversity, but I would say there are more traditional musicians out in villages.
Because you mentioned at the beginning, you couldn't get into the villages, you were staying in the cities.
The first time I went, of course, I've been back many, many times
Yes.
since Zimbabwe's independence, which was back in 1980.
So from which year you were able to get to the villages, and how was that like? How was that experience? How did that happen?
Really, really great. Yes. So I've been out to villages of, many musicians who I might have met them in the city or met them through people I knew in the city. Or, for example, there can be musicians in the city that have other musicians in their family that live in villages. And so they'll take me out to meet their family or to their family ceremony out in the village. And then when I started getting serious about recording people, which really started in 1991, that I started recording people. Although I never imagined I was going to sell those recordings in the beginning. And then that kind of evolved with starting to teach more people and to have the nonprofit organization and try to spread the music more widely. And some of my motivation with that was because I love the music and I want to have other people enjoy it and experience the healing aspect of it that I experience, and also to have people to play the music together with. But as time went on, and really musicians' economic situation improved a lot after independence in 1980. But then as the 90s wore on, toward the end of the 90s, the economic situation really got a lot worse and has become more and more challenging up to this day. And, there are many factors behind that, but one of the worst, I think, in the last few years, I would say at least the last 5 years, is that climate change is just really horrendous for traditional musicians who live in villages, because, as I mentioned earlier, they're not full-time performers like a performer in musician in Western culture. It's a different role. So they might play every day, but they're not going to have some other family pay them to play in a ceremony every day. That might be, fairly rare. And they grow their own food for their families. They're subsistence farmers. So what climate change is doing in Zimbabwe is that there can be years of drought, sometimes so extreme that no crops succeed, except maybe in some tiny area of the country that got lucky and got more rain. And then there can be other years where there's such torrential rain that crops can be destroyed, and there can be other kinds of damage to the soil and everything and flooding that can kill crops. And really, the traditional agriculture there was based on that historically, 9 years out of 10, it would rain really specific weeks every year. So you knew when to plant the seed, when to do, each stage of your farming. And 9 years out of 10, you'd have good crops, right? Because it always rained at the right time. Now, even if there is rain, it might not rain at the right time. So maybe it rains when you plant your crops, but then say your maize crop is 2 feet high, it's doing fine, and then there's no rain for months and it all dies. And then maybe the rain comes again when it's too late, right? So this is part of what climate change is doing that's decimating people's survival in Zimbabwe. And one of the sad things about that that's really affecting traditional music and its transmission to the next generations is that because that's so extreme and the economic situation is so extreme in Zimbabwe, many young people leave and they go work in the next door country of South Africa, which is a much bigger economy. And they go there, whether legally or illegally, and work there. so that they can support their families. And I would give the example of one young musician in his 20s that I know, who I had been telling him, you're so excellent how you play Mbira, how you sing, how you're learning from your father. You're my hope for the next generation, that the traditional music is really going to live on beyond people who are my age, because a lot of the traditional musicians I know are in their 60s like me. So this young man is now living in South Africa, working as a truck driver to support his family. So he's not playing with his father anymore. He's not in their ceremonies. He's not learning more and more. And a lot of the contexts where young musicians would learn from the elders are not happening as people struggle for survival. Even those who don't leave the country, they move from the village to the city to try and do some kind of work that can earn them a living to survive.
That's
so
devastating. That's devastating to hear.
It is. And then those young musicians in the city, they might be very solid in playing what they know, but some of them really lack the depth that would come from learning by playing with the elders. As I was describing, you learn through playing together with people who are better than you and hearing what they do, and then you find how to make that happen as you play.
It's beyond losing the music talent and skills, because as the culture sees it as a way to communicate with the ancestor, it's losing, in a sense, in a way, a communicative language. That's very unfortunate. So with the donation, the $1.8 million going to the organization,
1.3 has come from us to musicians and instrument makers there. And some of that is from donations. Some of that is from people buying the music albums, the recordings that we sell on the website. Some of that is from the instruments, the Mbira instruments that people buy, that money going back to the instrument makers. And something I would mention about that is that the international interest in Mbira has really helped to sustain the Mbira making tradition in Zimbabwe, because really people in Zimbabwe, most of them can't afford to pay for an instrument. So if someone in your extended family needs an instrument, they don't pay you to make it. If you're an instrument maker, you're just supposed to make it for them, right? But they wouldn't be able to afford to do that if they didn't have the support from international sales of their instruments, because that lets them do it full time. Because the instrument makers I work with, for a while it was up to 20, but some of them have died. So I would say the Mbira makers, currently it's about 16 that I work with. And they're able to be, for the most part, full-time instrument makers because we're selling their instruments. Not all of them. Some of them are rural people who are doing, they're farming and are not so full-time. Maybe they're not the best instrument makers yet. Some of the younger ones that don't have enough reputation to sell the volume of instruments that would support them to do it full-time. But some of them are definitely full-time instrument makers, and that just supports it. And then when some local person needs an instrument, they can either sell it to them really, inexpensively, or if it's an extended family member, maybe just make it for them for free. And so that's been an important support for the traditional instrument making in Zimbabwe. And interestingly enough, because the international interest has become so big, now there are more and more people there who want to make Mbiras just for the money, who weren't really traditional instrument makers. But whatever, things happen, the globe is getting smaller all the time, although it doesn't feel like it during the pandemic when we've been so isolated.
You mentioned that playing Mbira has a healing effect. Did it help you with pandemic situation?
Yes. And you know, many people who I taught over the years who had maybe stopped playing Mbira came back to playing Mbira during the pandemic. They contacted me to give them lessons online. Um, People were like, you know, I don't even have my Mbira anymore. Can you recommend which one I should buy? I used to have this kind. Which kind do you think I'd like that you have now? So a lot of people were contacting me because they wanted to start up again playing Mbira during the pandemic. Because, you know, it's very healing both in a mental and physical sense. It's very calming. And, you know, starting maybe, this was in the 90s, so quite a while ago, I had a Mbira student who was a music therapist, and then he got his other music therapist friends interested. So I taught several music therapists to play Mbira, who then used it in their music therapy practices.
So, for example, if I'm interested, but I have no music background, I don't consider myself.
You can still learn.
Is that feasible? Okay.
It's totally feasible. And, you know, one way to get started, you know, working through our organization is on the website, you can actually buy an instrument together with the first video lessons to download, where I'm teaching you how to hold the instrument correctly. And, you know, the first song that you learn, it's a set of lessons. And then we have currently 23, I'm working on the 24th set of video lessons that people can download. And people can contact me if they want to buy an instrument. I have you basically measure your hand from here to here when it's really stretched out, and then I know what size instrument you need to be comfortable playing. And what I really recommend is that people also do online lessons with me besides working with the video lessons, because I can check and see if you're making any mistakes. I can ask you about how you're holding the instrument to make sure you're not making some common mistakes that beginners might make when they're getting started. And I've taught people over Skype all over the world. I use Skype because it has good audio quality.
It's quite a long and incredible journey you went through when you were 16, met a musician from Zimbabwe, then went into the country for the first time just by yourself.
Yeah, for over a year. I lived there over a year.
In 1970s. Then you continue to go back every year, then every 2 years until the pandemic. So you started from one person who's interested somewhere in Berkeley, California, US.
No, actually, I was going to university in Seattle, Washington.
Seattle.
But as I said, that Zimbabwean musician didn't even play this type of mbira. He played a different type, but he actually arranged this type of mbira music, a couple of songs for the group of marimbas, xylophones that we played together. And so I had also heard it that way, as well as from the records that he had.
And now today you have managed to raise 1.3 million and give back to the musicians in Zimbabwe. You are using technology to amplify this music, this language, to communicate with the ancestors.
Yes, and something I'll just say about that is why, as more people outside Zimbabwe started to play mbira music, that was not considered wrong by Zimbabwean musicians, even though it's so central to their culture. But in their culture, they never lost the knowledge that we all come from the same original ancestors. And when I was first learning mbira music in the 1970s, we didn't know that in the Western world. That was headline news. Many years later, DNA analysis shows that we all come from the same ancestors, right? But they had not lost that knowledge because of their communication with ancestors. And the way that works is you might communicate with more recent ancestors, but if you have something that needs older knowledge, those ancestors can communicate with older and older and older and older ancestors. So they had not lost that knowledge that we, all humans on the planet, come from the same original ancestors. So they were like, oh, okay. So these people coming here from other countries, their ancestors want them to learn Mbira. Okay. Because even in Zimbabwe, you could have, say you have a grandfather who didn't even particularly care for Mbira music in his lifetime. Once he dies and becomes an ancestor, he's going to want Mbira music because it's the music of the ancestors. So they didn't see any, any difference that somebody from some other part of the world, because now there are people playing Mbira on every continent. I've actually even personally taught people Mbira from every continent. Not to mention selling instruments they ship off to other countries. Because by making them available through the website, we were the first ones to do that. And so I think there's some others doing that now, perhaps, but we were the first ones to do that and really make the music accessible to people all over the world and try to draw people all over the world into supporting it in Zimbabwe through us.
How did it happen that people from 5 different continents knew about it even? Like, how did they first access it? Is it through your website and your promotion?
Sometimes it's through the website. I would say in more recent decades, a lot of it's through the website. But before that, there were recordings. The first records that were widely distributed of Mbira music were made by an ethnomusicologist in the 1970s, actually. And I think those were sold pretty widely in parts of the world, definitely the North America, Europe, Japan. And then I also was recorded on CDs that were pretty widely distributed. That was, let's see, when was that? That was in the 1990s.
Through record labels?
Yes. So there were records that were making people more aware of it. And actually how I started teaching more widely than just my local area was through a couple of things. One is that there's a Zimbabwean music festival that happens in the northwest part of the US. And so other people who came to that started asking me to teach or coming to workshops that I was teaching. And then when I first had a widely distributed CD, musicians in other parts of the US started contacting me about wanting to learn. And that's how I started teaching on the East Coast of the US, teaching workshop groups. And so it kind of expanded from there. And then
wow.
And then later on, when I started the nonprofit organization, when I was touring with, Zimbabwean Mbira masters who were just amazing musicians, and performing at universities and different places around the country, that also amplified it. There's also Mbira, the nonprofit YouTube channel, where you can see videos like the one we started with, but a lot of videos in Zimbabwe of Zimbabwean musicians. I make those to promote the albums. So I'm hoping that people who see those videos for free will want to support those musicians and buy their albums on the website and download them and enjoy the music and know that they're supporting musicians in Zimbabwe.
You also mentioned that you also mentioned the current climate change conference played some music you recorded. That's
yes, they contacted me a little while ago and they said, we're putting together videos of music from all over the world and we'd like to have some Mbira. And, we want to also know about how climate change is affecting the countries that the different music is coming from. And that is actually being broadcast today, tomorrow, and the next day. And I think one of our videos is going to be on each day. I haven't actually seen it yet, but But I sent them the videos and I did little introductions talking about climate change in Zimbabwe. Because Zimbabwe is really being affected by climate change. So that's very important. So that's all free to listen to and see. So I think if people look for the information about the conference, they'll probably be able to find the link.
Yes, I really hope this will help to bring people's awareness of the music and the current situation in Zimbabwe. Because if we share the same ancestor from many, many, many generations ago, we also share the same responsibility to help each other in the current situation. Yes.
Yes, exactly. That's how I feel.
Great.
So I want to remind people about the website, because if you have more questions and you want to contact me, you can also do that through the website. So there's a contact link there. So the website again is Mbira, like the instrument, mbira.org.
I definitely put the, when I put the recording on YouTube, I'll make sure the your website and your YouTube channel will be on the top as well, so people can easily find it and then follow you. My last question: Did you feel your whole journey was guided spiritually? Did you feel? Was it just your personal interest, personal curiosity,
you know what,
personal passion?
that's a really interesting question, because my perspective on that really changed over the years. Because when I first went, when I was 20, to Zimbabwe, I was just in love with the music. I didn't really have that way of thinking about it. And when people were saying, oh, she's playing because of spirits, I was thinking, what do you mean? I'm practicing for hours every day so that I can really learn to do this well. So I didn't really see it that way when I was first learning. But then as the years went by, then I started to really understand that there was a spiritual guidance and a spiritual experience. And I remember even a song that my children liked. There was something about it that made me realize that my relationship with music was spiritual, and that it's my spiritual food. You know, we all need food, not only for our bodies, but also for the rest of us.
You need it for our soul as well.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you so much, Erica, for sharing your really, really unique journey and a very, very special music instrument, part of our shared human cultural heritage, really. So for people coming today and for people watching the YouTube video, make sure you visit the website and follow the Mbira YouTube channel by Erica. Thank you.
We also have a Facebook, Mbira the nonprofit.
Right. So your website?
You can follow that too. I would start with the website because there's just so much there. Under the What is Mbira part of the website, there's so much information about the music. There's biographies of musicians. There's photos of Mbira makers. And then there's also a lot of information on the website about learning Mbira. And then there's all the music that you can download. There's information about what we do. I didn't actually mention one of the things the organization does is we're paying some of the traditional musicians to teach Mbira in public schools in Zimbabwe. And we get donations that we use to buy instruments for the schools and then to pay a little bit every month to the musicians who are teaching the children. So there's information about that project, some photos of the kids who are learning, videos. Yeah.
Well, if I have to choose going out for a meal or learning something healing and giving back to people, education and the human society, I know where what choice I will make.
Thank you.
So this is really, really great. So I'm going to stop recording.